Hi, everybody. I'm Megan Torrance, and welcome to this session where we're going to be looking at the adoption of xAPI and how the xAPI Learning Cohort is supporting that. I'm the CEO at Torrance Learning, where we do a lot of instructional design, a lot of course development, some custom software and platform implementation around custom corporate, typically corporate learning solutions. And we spend a lot of time on professional development and helping people do that, all of that better.
Hi, I'm Jess, and I am an instructional designer and project manager at Torrance Learning, and I'm also the xAPI cohort host. I come from a background in education, both in K through 12 and higher education. In K through 12, I was working on culturally relevant pedagogy and helping under-resourced and underrepresented students have access to equitable educational opportunities. When I transitioned into higher ed, I did a lot of the same work in looking at different culture structures and norms within higher education institutions and how they increase access and opportunity for underrepresented and marginalized students. I'm also very passionate about community development and am excited to be a part of the xAPI community.
Well, and that's why you're part of the xAPI community, right? It's that right? That's why Jess is our fourth xAPI cohort host, and we'll talk about what that means. But that really, the increase, the welcoming, the community, the access, the ability to get people engaged and reducing barriers to entry is really what Cohort is all about. I did research with the eLearning Guild in 2019. It's been released for about 10 months by the time you'll see this. We were looking at the state of adoption, not the state of the specification, but the state of adoption in organizations and by software firms and platforms and services firms that support organizations, right? The vendor community. Looking at the state of adoption and what is keeping people from adopting, as well as those who are adopting, what did they do to get there? What barriers did they overcome? The big thing that we found with that research, not surprising, is that most organizations have not yet fully adopted xAPI. The companies and organizations who did adopt xAPI started with pilot projects, and they started with experimenting, proof of concept, figuring things out. Most of them built small pilot projects and then took that, learned something, threw it out, and then actually implemented xAPI. And really, that's kind of the vibe behind the xAPI cohort, is to provide that safe space, that welcoming space, that access to experts that you may not have in your own organization, and help people get along that adoption path faster so that they can get that supported proof of concept up and running and say, hey boss, look what I made, we can do this too. So let's talk about what the cohort actually is.
The xAPI cohort is a 12-week learning by doing online learning experience. So even before COVID-19 and we transitioned all of our things online, the cohort was already there. We do weekly web sessions where folks can join in live and hear from experts in the field and in the industry. And we record those web sessions and host them online so folks can join in at any time. It invites all folks from software developers to instructional designers to someone who's just getting their feet wet in the L&D space to come in and learn. We have experts who are part of designing the specification to folks like me who are just learning. It's vendor neutral, which means that we won't be selling you different products on and on, but we do give cohort members access to, because of our lovely sponsors, access to some of the platforms and tools that are necessary to prototype, mess things up, try things, as Megan talked about. In addition to the web sessions, we have teams that meet throughout the 12 weeks and design something. They do from producing statements from a storyline course to last semester we had someone using Makey to produce statements from a Makey board. And we give access to what the teams are doing to anyone. So you can access team websites and see how they scaled their project or what they've done throughout the 12 weeks online. So in addition to the web sessions, the team participation, there are websites for all the teams. And we also have a Slack communication channel so that you have access not only to the folks who are in the current cohort, but to folks who participated in cohort throughout the past 11 cohorts. 10 cohorts. We're currently on the 11th.
We'll start the 11th. The 11th starts September 3rd.
Yes.
So, and the excitement and all the things that Jess is describing around Cohort Offers, I hope you could see that's a huge support ecosystem, from the tools and the technology, the curriculum and the structure, the space, and then the connections. Right? There's a lot that goes on. We have an entire Slack channel just for talking about people who are struggling with forming a particular statement. And that has taken time to create, and time to develop. So a little bit of history. ADL started the design cohorts back in the early days of xAPI pre-release. And the concept of the design cohorts that were led by Craig Wiggins was to provide a space for early adopters, mostly software companies, some practitioners, and people in the learning record provider space, to come in, experiment with a specification, find out what could I do with it and what holes exist in it, right? So it was really helpful around the design, and the collaboration was really, really key. It was free, it was open, just like the specification is, and that had a ton of appeal. I joined a team along with several other people from Torrance Learning, and LearnShare and a few other places, Target, right? We built a team in the spring of 2015, which turned out to be the last xAPI cohort that ADL was able to sponsor. And I learned so much in that cohort and was so impressed with the community and the collaboration and the support that I said, well, somebody's got to do this. So I picked it up. And when I say I picked it up, I created a team that picked it up, because there's no way you can do something like this by yourself. I don't know how Craig Wiggins did it. He's a Superman. So in this fall of 2015, we hosted the first learning cohort. Right? So the xAPI learning cohort. We had about 35 handpicked people, and we cuddled them. We made spaces for them. We put them on teams based on what we thought they wanted to do. And if they weren't moving along, we called them up and said, hey, how are you doing? Can we help you? We didn't have a shared communication platform. We didn't have a lot of the things that make this easy, but we did have that regular weekly web session, which is about half teams reporting out on their progress, what help they need, that kind of thing, what their successes were that week, and half guest speaker, right? That get formal education. So there's that mix. For the next few cohorts, we averaged about 100 people in a cohort. At 100 people, I couldn't be calling up people who were falling behind. That didn't work out so well. We did transition to Allison Haas, who was our second xAPI cohort host, and she really kind of formalized that role of host. She's not picking up the phone and taking responsibility for your experience. She's holding space for that. Right? And I think that was one of the key things about the cohort. We don't teach you to use xAPI. We hold space for you to learn about xAPI. We then, about the time that we moved to our third cohort host, Peter Gunther, we jumped all of a sudden to 350 and then over 600 people in the cohort. And at that point, that's a community that thrives and exists on its own. Right? We can't possibly be a part of every experience. And if you have a question, we can't possibly answer it. At 100 to 350, if you had a question, we helped you. We helped find you the answer. At 600, the community jumps in before my team, our team, can support that, right? Which is really powerful and amazing. There's times questions come up and it's like, you know what? We can be hands off, Jess, because the answer is out there and the answer will come forward. So that's really exciting. And then we get to Jess, and at this point, right, this is a movement. This is powerful. There are people who get jobs. There are people who get ahead in their careers because they had the experience of having actually done xAPI. And when adoption is this early, right, and I know we're all frustrated because it did, right? spec was released in 2013. When adoption is still out in the wild this early, right? To have someone who's actually done it, that's a rare bird. That is great for your career, and we're actually seeing this. So Jess, you mentioned one of the projects. What kinds of projects have you seen in recent semesters?
So there's kind of this plan for what the web sessions provide the participants or the cohort members, and then they take what they learn and they go. So projects jump off from anywhere. We've had some really great projects using Alexa voice flow, where they're doing some customer service interactions where Alexa is the customer, and we're testing the customer service rep competencies and producing data statements from that interaction. We've seen video. So video, how are our learners stopping, pausing, looking at different videos, and how effective are those? We've seen some very entry-level projects where they're looking at just courses and producing statements from courses, to people developing whole profiles themselves and really taking off there. One of my favorite projects that I've seen over 2 cohort semesters is the early childhood education project. And what they're doing is developing an app to see how early childhood educators can keep track of what happens in daycare centers, in classrooms. So this is the first project, I think Megan saw a statement that said a child use the restroom, but it was a very fun experiment, because at first, the team was looking at the profile, the ECE profile, and learning what the statements were, and then they're moving towards an app and how they can use apps to track that. It's interesting to see the breadth of projects that take place from kind of the experience levels that you're talking about, Megan, how we have some folks who are entry level, but we also have some folks continue on from cohort to cohort. So it's a welcoming environment to newbies. It asks for real stories of using xAPI from a diverse set of people, and you get to meet folks that are like Megan, who has been in this field for the beginning, from the beginning.
You know, what's really interesting too is as I look, right, and we reflect on how many years I've been at this, and probably a lot of people listening to this too. The early days of xAPI, because of the lift, because of the cognitive lift, the software lift in order to do it, right? The technology itself, we all know, is pretty simple. But the lift to get there and the need for an LRS was pretty steep. And the projects that we saw publicized in presentations and everything were big, vendor funded often, right? Or vendor sustained projects that were these big, glorious, beautiful projects that seemed very much out of the reach of the average instructional designer in an average organization. And those projects needed to happen because we needed to see what the vision could be. But xAPI, like SCORM, right, will take much more wide-scale adoption when it can be done in a geek-free environment, right? When we can lower the barriers to entry and we can make this an accessible opportunity. And so, Jess, I wondered if you could talk just briefly about just the really that opening up and that welcoming that the cohort attempts to do.
So one of the first things that we talk about with cohort from our first web session is the vibe of cohort, right? So there are folks that want to ask questions but might be intimidated to ask those questions to a Megan Torrance, right? So we want to provide space for them to ask those questions and reach out. And the vibe is, come on, welcome, come in, ask those questions, share your thoughts. And we do that in multiple ways. One, by setting those norms early on within that first session to let folks know about the space. Two, having open communication channels. So Slack being a primary example of how we communicate in cohort. Folks can submit anything that they have thoughts around, and Slack also holds all of the previous cohort members, so you can talk to anybody. And sometimes when I first started hosting Cohort, I felt responsible to respond to everyone's questions, but now folks are jumping in even before I can get to them. So that welcoming environment takes place not only in the web sessions where we're all joining together, updating each other and talking to key industry thought leaders, but it's taking place behind the scenes in the Slack channel where folks can, and we have channels for a myriad of things, from project Slack channels, from the main Slack channel to meetup Slack channels, which, you know, maybe we won't be meeting up anymore. But it is a way for regions and areas that are closer to kind of get to know each other in person, to a job board where you can start sharing if you have job open availability or if you're searching for a job. And I think that is how we can, one of the things that really struck me was when folks were using all those different channels to connect in different ways to different people.
I think what's really important too is that when we strip out the hefty price tag requirement coming in, right, we reduce lower barriers to entry. It's no longer the old boys club. And actually what I love is that there's so many new people coming into the space via this platform, and we get to see new faces, we get to hear from new voices, and that's really, really important. That's important in tech, that's important in learning and development, and really what we want to do is that represent that if you could see it, you can be it, and we're going to lift up those voices that really need to be heard. And I think that's another positive undertone that is a big part of Cohort that has evolved over time.
One of the ways I saw that come out last semester was one of our first, she was a first cohort member. She'd never done anything with xAPI, and she was using Moodle. And so she was producing statements and presented out on her project at the xAPI party at the end of the semester, and presented in Cohort. And one of the things that she told me was like, this is too simple. I can't share this out. What I'm doing is too simple. And I was like, but there are folks who haven't done anything. And so your perspective matters and is valuable to help folks who haven't done anything see that they can as well. And so then after she presented, she got so much feedback from people. She was able to jump in and advance her project based off of that feedback, and felt so confident in her ability to do so because she was able to talk about what she was doing. She had this support network of folks who were in her sessions, and then she had the whole community within the cohort to back her up as she keeps going. So you can literally see the growth of our participants throughout the semester.
Well, what's next? We should wrap this up because somebody's playing music, and we're going to be danced off a virtual stage at some point. A couple of things, right? So what I'd like to do is encourage everybody to sign up for the cohort, right? So xapicohort.com, you go, you sign up. Now, a lot of people are like, I am so busy, or I can't do a project, or I don't have any ideas. So there are multiple levels at which we will see people engage with cohort. So one are the people who, like we were just describing, they're all in. They are spending 10 hours a week on a project. They show up at 2 o'clock Eastern every Thursday for a web session. They're in the Slack all night and all weekend long. You kind of wonder how these people maintain, paid employment because they're spending a lot of time in cohort. We do wonder about some of our people. But there are also people who just show up to web sessions, or just watch the recordings, or just chime in the Slack because they want to get inspired, or just want to be on the mailing list because every once in a while there's going to be something they want to see. And so there's lots of ways to engage with cohort. So don't feel like your schedule or your ability to do a project are going to hold you back. So I think really that's our big thing. This is a spot where our industry can open up with welcoming arms and invite more and more people to get in doing this. That makes the industry stronger. That makes the specification stronger at the same time that it makes those people stronger. And that's really key. And I will also say, while I'm here, a huge shout out to the vendor community that helps make this happen. So while we say xAPI is vendor neutral, right? Because we don't want a space where you're going to be attacked by a bunch of vendors trying to sell you something. On the other hand, it's really the vendors who have worked tirelessly to further this specification, and they continue that work by offering free trial access or extended trials or more in-depth trials to their products to people who are using Cohort. And that gives people the ability to try something out and go further than maybe they could have gone on their own.